Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well tonight. If you'd like to let me know if you can hear me okay in the chat, that would be wonderful. And also feel free to say where you're joining us from tonight. Again, making sure you can hear me okay. If you want to type it into the stream, the live chat there. I'm hoping you can. I guess I'll get started and hopefully someone will flag me down if you can't hear me. This is my first time doing one of these kind of for real. I've done a live stream to just sort of practice, not having scheduled it ahead of time. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but I think we'll work out the kinks. All right. So thanks for joining us this evening. And before we get started, I did want to give you the opportunity to go grab some water, always important, a snack, or use the restroom really quickly. If you're all set with that, make sure you've got your supplies on hand, which I have around here somewhere. Okay, so what we're going to need for tonight is elastic, if you have it. If not, an old t-shirt that you don't mind cutting up to make straps or ties for your mask. Paper, white paper, pretty transparent would be good. It can be lined, whatever you've got around the house. A marker or a pen, scissors, and if you have a fancy pair of fabric scissors, you want to make sure you have a separate pair of scissors for your paper. We don't want to use the same scissors if it's a nice pair of scissors, at least. If you're using, your regular like dollar store pair of scissors, I don't think you have to worry about it. Also, if you have pins or clips, they'll come in handy. If you do not, don't worry. You can still complete the project without them. Fabric, cotton fabric in particular. And then a ruler, if you have one. I have a clear one, which is really nice. And also, I'll show you my rotary mat in a minute. Okay. So hopefully you've got all of your supplies sorted out at this point. In the description of this live stream, I have a link to the Craft Passion pattern that we're going to be using. What my intention here is that we're going to use the pattern, but that we're going to actually simplify it a little bit because many of you may be absolute beginners to sewing. So I didn't want to get too complicated and just, allow you to really whip up a ton of these masks and have fun doing it. The other thing is I've allotted 2 hours for this workshop. So we have plenty of time, fingers crossed, to actually do a separate type of mask, which is called the deaconess mask. And I'll show you that in a moment, or I can actually do it right now. So we've got 2 different styles that we're going to be working on tonight, if time permits. We've got the Craft Passion style, which is more fitted. And then we have Deaconess, which does not have a center seam down the middle. And in this example, I'm using ties. This is from a t-shirt, so you'll get to see that process. But just so you have options, I know some people don't feel super comfortable with the fact that the Craft Passion pattern does have a seam down the center, which means that when you're stitching there, you're creating tiny little holes. It may not really be that big of an issue. I just know that we all have our own different comfort levels with those kinds of things. So again, if you would be so kind as to let me know where you're joining from tonight. I'm sure we have a lot of people from Delaware, but this is being publicized more broadly than that. So in the live chat, hopefully you can see that there. Go ahead and type where you're joining from. And that'll be a way that we can kind of communicate throughout this workshop. While you're doing that, I want to go over a few sort of ground rules. And that is when you're sewing, I think the first thing you want to do is leave behind all of the baggage of the day. So, as much as you can, just imagine you're hanging all of your worries and your troubles by the door, and you can pick them up again on the way out. How's that? The next thing is take a minute to settle in and make some space for the creations to come. We're vowing to try our best tonight and to have fun doing it. Also, if you are going to be donating these masks or giving them to someone else, send love to the recipient as you make your project. A big rule, a big important one that I want to underscore here is respect the tools that you've been given. What do I mean by that? In sewing, many of the tools that we use are very sharp. Others of them are very hot, in the example of an iron. They could even be toxic if we're talking about, and this won't be tonight, but if you're talking about like, what is it called? The fray check, which prevents the fabric from fraying and unraveling. That stuff is toxic. There's all kinds of things out there. So we always want to pay attention to what we're doing. We want to turn off and put away supplies when we're done using them. And, a good example of this is if you're using a rotary cutter. I didn't put this as a required supply or material on purpose because, if you're just getting started, you don't need to go out and buy everything fancy, right? But if you're using one of these, you'll see the blade is exposed right now. And when I'm done using it, I always want to make sure to close that back up so that the blade is not sticking out. Hi, Kenya. Glad you could join us. And so that's what I mean by, putting things away as you go. Also, I know that we're not all in the same room right now, but let's be kind to one another. Pretend we're in a workshop in the same room. So that even goes with me. I may make mistakes. Let's just give each other some grace. And we lift each other up in here, not tear each other down. The other thing is listen carefully to instructions and don't be afraid to try new things within or just outside of those parameters. Live a little, okay? And above all, create already. It's the name of the channel. So let's get started. We're first going to be using the Craft Passion pattern that's linked in the description. If you need to pull up another device, just go, Google Craft Passion face mask pattern. What's going to happen when you do that is you may end up getting this like 30-page pattern with, there's I think 3 or 4 different styles, and it gets really overwhelming, and we don't want that. What we want is just the image of the pattern itself. So I'll show you these. This looks like it got a little bit out of order here. This is what the full tutorial looks like. Okay, but what we're looking for is going to be more of just the picture. So just in case you don't have that, you want to make sure it can be a little confusing, but that you get just the picture of the mask that we're cutting out. If you've had a chance to print it out, great. If not, you can, on another device on your laptop, trace it out on the screen, which is what I did here. And you can see my lines are like really kind of bumpy and all of that good stuff. There was a scale on it that I started to draw in here. But this was, the scale was saying 2 inches, so that when you were printing it or tracing it, what have you, you would know, okay, I have the right size of my pattern, because that can be pretty important. So I hope, and please, chat in or type in the live chat there if you need some time to do that. But I'm going to otherwise assume that you've had a chance to print that off and or trace it. The thing of it is, though, this pattern, and there may be, a different image floating out there, did not include a seam allowance. So that's an important thing to know when you're sewing. Does it or does it not, in this pattern, include a seam allowance? What is a seam allowance? Well, I'm probably going to do a terrible job defining it, but it's the amount of room or space that gets taken up by the seam. So in my dress, you can't see me flashing you here, but you can see this is actually a serged seam. You can see there's about a 1/4 inch that gets taken up with the stitching. So that kind of is hidden from view, but it's important. So when I traced this did not include my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to show you now how to include that. And you do not need this fancy paper, but I have to show it off. It's kind of funny. I took draping lessons before, and the instructor was like, "This stuff is so expensive, ration it." So she got in my head, and I very judiciously use it. But it's kind of like freezer paper, and some people will use that instead. I'm just going to go ahead and cut off a little bit of it. And if you have your white paper, this is what you need to be doing now. We're preparing to make a pattern from the pattern. What kind of sense does that mean? Well, the reason that makes sense, sorry for all the noise there, is that on this pattern, like I said, there's no seam allowance. And the other thing is it includes all the different sizes. So you've got small kid, you've got young kid, 7 to 12, teen/women's, and then men's sizes. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and do the smallest size, which works for ages 3 to 6 according to the pattern. And I like to eyeball things. You may not have the same comfort level as me. If you like to be a little bit more precise, one of these is great. It's called a seam guide. And you can, sort of slide this little piece to get to a 1/4 inch mark and then use that as your guide. I like to live a little dangerously though. And so I tend to just, like I said, eyeball it. This is just a regular black pencil. A layout pencil, I guess. So you see the smallest size here. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to trace the line that I already had traced out from my screen. And again, you may have printed this, but the reason we're doing it again is so that we can make patterns out of each size, if that makes sense. That way you're not destroying your quote unquote master pattern every time, or like having to reprint it multiple times. So we're just taking that white paper or more sort of tracing paper if you have it. And now I had traced it, and now I'm going to add about a 1/4 inch to that on the outside of every side. Again, I'm just eyeballing. You will find that many sewing projects are actually very forgiving in this regard. A wise woman just told me recently, or reminded me, if you kind of have wavy lines and that kind of thing, you can fix that up on your seam allowance. Again, there's that term when you get to your machine. So, one important thing I almost forgot to do. I'm going to label this pattern piece. So I'm going to put CP for Craft Passion so that I know that it's this particular mask pattern. And then what was the size called? Small kid 3 to 6. Okay. So now I actually have multiple patterns. I was trying the eldenberry pattern as well. But here's young kid, here's men, and then this is the eldenberry. And this is one I actually had traced from a mask I bought my son on Etsy from Spider-Man. So got to make another mask for him that way. And that's a really cool thing you can do is you can trace existing garments or even like pillows, many other things. You can trace them and recreate a pattern. So there's some really great videos floating around there on YouTube that teach you how to do just that. And maybe it's something we can cover in the future, but like, for example, the dress that that I'm wearing today, I did not make, but I think I am going to quote unquote knock it off or, you know, make a pattern from the existing garment. So I've done that many times, and it's a great way to find what really works for your particular wardrobe and that kind of thing. Okay, so now I've got my small kid pattern piece, and it's time to pick the fabric. So I'm hoping to have some input here from you guys, but if not, I will just decide. As mentioned, this is a reversible face mask, so I'd like to do two different pattern designs, I should say, fabric designs. So we've got this teal, got purple leopard print. We have this sort of faded taupe flower. We have plaid, which is brown and yellow. Another sort of cream and rose colored floral design. This one I'm not too sure about because it seems to be a little bit more of a heavier fabric, and breathability is really important, but you know, this is an option. Here we've got paisley. My husband says this one looks just like a tie, a men's tie. Another brown plaid. So feel free if you have a favorite so far. This we only have a little bit of, but we could get creative. Another leopard print. This is more of a summery, beachy kids print. And then again, I think this one might be a little bit too heavy, but we have this brown paisley. So any preferences so far? I know not everybody's familiar with live chat, and hopefully you're not typing in the comments down below because I can't see comments during the video, but I can see the live chat, which is to the right of the main screen here. I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards this one, this one. I don't know. This and this could go pretty well together. Very like fall like colors, you know. Let's go with it. Since I didn't hear anything from the peanut gallery, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is lay out my fabric. It is folded in a rough manner. I have pre-washed my fabric, so the edges look a little bit frayed and that kind of thing. It is a good idea to pre-wash your fabric. If you did not, don't fret. It'll be fine. It will probably shrink a little bit in the wash, but I don't think it's going to be too significant. Fingers crossed. Okay, so here is our pattern piece. Now, one thing I didn't mention, but I figure everybody has some stuff laying around their house, is pattern weights. Now, you can use pins for this purpose too. Some people like to pin their pattern piece directly onto the fabric like so. Oops, got the little corner. Okay. But if you're like me, you like to take a little bit of shortcuts. So I have bars of soap. They used to be wrapped, look a little fancier, but I just kind of put that right on top. And then as we discussed, the seam allowance is already here, so I don't need to trim outside of this piece. I'm going to trim or cut right along the edges of this pattern piece. I do have a rotary cutter that I showed you a moment ago. Of course, my cutting table always gets so insane that you have to bear with me because it's hidden under a million things. So again, that is a rotary cutter, which allows me on this special rotary mat to just kind of cut it out like a pizza slice. But I'm guessing that many of you do not. So take a marker or something that's going to show, if you can, on your fabric and start tracing. And hopefully you can see this okay. But I've got a red piece of chalk here. It's called Taylor's chalk. And that looks like it's coming through pretty well. Again, I can trace right up to the edge, and that's no problem because the seam allowance is already on this new pattern piece that I created from the master pattern. And, you know, I have not been making the craft passion pattern for very long. I was doing the deaconess one for a long time. So I can't say with 100% certainty that, like, you know, the masks fit totally true to size or whether they run a little bit bigger or smaller. I have a very small face, so like I can wear the kids one and be fine. So I think it really depends on the person too. You can see I'm just cutting out. One thing when you're cutting, you want to try to obviously cut away from yourself and move your body as you cut. Okay, so there's the two pieces. This particular fabric does not show, unfortunately, really like what the right side is and the wrong side. Whereas if you have something like this, I can clearly tell you that is the right side. That's the side that you want to face outward. And this is the wrong side. A little subtle on your screen probably, but there you can see it a little bit better. This is the right side and this is the wrong side. So, I mean, that's a little bit more forgiving for this particular purpose, just in case we cut it out wrong or something. Each side is the same. I'm going to do the same thing with the other plaid. And I did want to show you making some more gender neutral or masculine masks because it seems like I see so many that are intended for little girls. And that just might be me, just what I come across online. I'm not sure, but kids are going to want all kinds of different options. Yes. No. Okay. So let's come this way and just one more cut and we'll have all 4 pattern pieces ready. So this is exciting. Okay. The next thing we're going to need is our elastic. I know that not everybody has access to elastic, so I'm going to show you the t-shirt tie method as well, which is super easy, luckily. Let's use black because I think it's going to go a little bit better. I mean, we could get away with white on here, but my white is like really pretty vibrant compared to that, I feel like. Okay. Oh, looks like some of these pieces were already pre-cut. It's interesting because I was giving away masks for so long that like people were making kits where things were pre-cut for us, which is really great. I think on a small child's mask, you're going to need less than 8 inches. So, you know, 7 inches, 7.5. I I think bigger is probably better because their ears start to kind of curve in if they're too small. So in this example, this is just shy of 7 inches. We'll go with it. I'm a little bit nervous though that it could be a snug fit. But again, if it's for a 3 to 6-year-old, that should probably be fine. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to be moving to the sewing machine in just a second, but I'm going to be putting the right side or the pretty side together with the other right side. So put your pretty sides together. Just pretend that they're different here. And the same thing with your other 2 pieces. So when you, how did I lose that already? That's the beauty of live video, right? Get your pieces together and we'll get ready to go to the machine for those of you who have your elastic. And then if you don't, let's look at t-shirt ties now. Oh, I know where they are. They're on the floor. Okay. So here's my other pieces. Again, I'm going to pretend like I have the pretty sides together. So we'll just kind of put those there. They're all together. Here's the pieces of elastic. Next, for the ties, I have this ancient white men's undershirt that I'm going to be using. But, you know, you might have something a little more fun. We won't really be seeing the design of the t-shirt or anything like that. Maybe it would show a little bit if it was higher up, if you had a design there. But what we're going to do is make sure to cut off the hem or the part that gets folded under and sewn on the bottom. I've already done that. But we're going to be cutting strips of this material that are approximately 1.5 inches wide. So you can get out your ruler and be a little bit more precise about it. If you have a rotary mat, you can follow, oops, you can follow, I can't get it to show there, follow the grid lines. But this does not need to be super precise, and you'll see why in a minute. Almost all the way through. Just have to get this last little bit here. Okay, now what I've created is actually a tube or a loop. Okay? Because your t-shirts are made in this manner, which is kind of crazy when you realize, like, hey, I look at my t-shirt and I don't have any side seams like I do on all my other clothes. So that's just a little fun tidbit. It's very stretchy. So what we're going to do now is we need it to not be a loop anymore. So I'm going to cut it. And I'm actually going to cut this into 4. So I'm going to fold it over and cut again. That'll give me 2 pieces. And then I'll do the same thing. All right, now here's where the fun comes in. It's already stretchy, but we're going to make it a lot longer now. So let's pull and pull and pull. And then it starts to become t-shirt yarn. People will make large spools of this. There's videos on how you can take a single shirt and just make crazy long ties. So let's do that for all 4. My hope is that the ties are going to be almost too long and that people will cut them down to size as needed. But it's funny, it feels like some pieces will become like a little longer than others. Like one little section of t-shirt is a little bit more stretchy than the rest. Okay, so we've got the 4 ties for whoever would like to use that option. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see, I can do, I can save these for later. If you want to type in the live chat, if you're using elastic or ties, I'll know kind of how to tailor this. But for those of you who do not have a machine, have no fear. It is still possible to make this project. So I got this little kit, and it came from Joann Fabrics, but there's so many different options. I think this might be made by Singer, the sewing machine company, but it just comes with kind of like all the little accoutrements that you would need to get started with sewing, and they're in a small size. It's made for kids. But in here, there was a needle, or multiple needles, I should say, thread, and a thimble, which is all you really need. If you've never done this before, let's start from the beginning. My thread got a little tangled, but you want to kind of, what they say, love on your thread. So use the natural oils in your fingers to rub on the thread. It's going to help to make it behave a little bit for you. The other thing I like to do personally is actually lick the end before I insert it. I have no idea if that actually helps, but it's one of those like placebo effect things. And you can see the hole is very small there. So it takes some doing. And of course, when you're on screen trying to do this, it's probably about 50 times harder. But we will get it. The other thing I do, if it's like really not cooperating for me, also I do this at the machine as well, is just recut the end. So let's do that really quick. There is even a needle threader in here, believe it or not. This simple little device. I've like never really gotten the hang of using that, which probably would be a good idea. I think theoretically you insert like this. And then I always just was like, oh, I'm too good for that. I can figure it out. It's no big deal. But maybe not, you know? We may have to come back to this part. It's like, do I have a really big-eyed needle? That would be ideal. We'll try the other end, see if that works. If not, I'll come back. But it is definitely possible to hand sew this project. So I don't want you to give up. You're probably having like such an easier time than me right now. There we go. I was on the struggle bus. Okay, so you see that needle just hanging out there. We want to get that to the center of our thread. And the length of this thread is not too super long. The reason is if you get it to be too long, it's going to get tangled left and right. So here are my 2 ends. And I'm going to, again, kind of use the oils for my fingers on there. I'm going to make a loop Okay, so there's my ends. Tuck them in and pull. So you can see the knot. Now I want to have that knot be centered somewhat, and try it one more time. And then it should double knot on itself. A double knot should be sufficient, but if you really want to be sure, go for your triple knot. Why not? It just takes another second. If I can get it, there we go, triple knot. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Next, we're going to pretend this is our mask. There is a thimble involved too that you can use on your left hand, assuming you're a right-handed person. But we're going to insert the needle through the top as we get started, and then the knot will be on the bottom side. And I'm going to come over about 1/4 of an inch maybe and insert the needle again. Somehow we got tangled there a moment ago. We don't want that to happen. We can just pretend that didn't happen, okay? It's just between you and me. And then I'll continue on. But that's sort of like what I was talking about. Like if you have the thread be too long, it can sometimes get tangled. And it does take a little bit of getting used to. But just again, pretend that part's not there, okay? But you can see one stitch, and then I'm going over and doing another stitch. And so on and so forth. Now these stitches are not like perfectly straight by any means, but you can continue on in this manner all the way around the perimeter of your pattern pieces, just as if you were sewing with the machine. When you get to the end of the thread, like you're probably going to need to rethread. And at some point, what you're going to do is tie a knot again, and then repeat the same procedure to thread your needle. So let's get to the machine. I've got my pattern pieces and my ties and my elastic. And this is my old faithful machine here, Jan, the Janome. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is I think I'm going to change out my thread for you guys so that you can actually see some contrast. This is black thread, which would be ideal for this pattern that I'm making, this design of the fabric. It would complement very well and that sort of thing. But for video purposes, I think you're going to have a really hard time seeing that. So I think I might go with this yellow. And I'm going to make sure to select a bobbin that goes with my particular machine. And if you have not had a chance to view a video of how to thread your particular machine model, that would have been really helpful right about now, but you can try to follow along with what I'm doing. Each machine is different. But I've got my thread coming up from the bottom. Okay, I've got my thread spool cap on here. And now I need to thread the bobbin, or wind the bobbin, I should say. So I'm going to use this little metal piece. It looks like a screw. And I'm going to run it through that channel, make sure it's nice and taut, or kind of like tight and snug. Then I'm going to insert the end of my thread into my bobbin. So there's a little hole here. And, you know, there's different types of bobbins, so they don't all look the same, but this is a fairly common type. This little groove right here is going to correspond with this notch or little piece that comes out on the machine itself. So right here on the bobbin winder, it's going to snap in place if I did it right. Okay, love that sound. Now I'm going to pull out my hand wheel. Not all machines have you do that. So this is like a mechanical machine. There's some that are electronic, so they may not make you do that. My machine is on, and I'm going to press down on the presser foot now, or the foot pedal, I should say. And something is not right. There we go. I had to push that over to the side. Okay, here we go. Now it started to kind of wind around the top, which is super annoying, but sometimes you can't always control that. What's going to happen though is I'm going to have my foot on the foot pedal for this whole time, and then it's going to stop automatically once the bobbin has been threaded. The bobbin goes in the lower compartment. It's the kind of bottom stitches, and then your needle thread is going to be the top. I don't like to have really long tails hanging out, so I'm going to trim that using the thread cutter on the side of the machine there. That's one thing I was sewing forever before realizing that there was a thread cutter. So you're welcome if you didn't know that. Most machines have one. There should be a diagram on your machine to follow in terms of where to run the thread through the channels. So in here I have a little diagram. And it becomes like muscle memory. Like you do it so often that you will get the hang of it. Believe it or not, the first couple times can be pretty painful. But we're going to turn our hand lever. I did push that hand wheel in again, and I'm turning it so that this metal piece or this uptake lever is up. Then I'm going to run it through. So again, there's a diagram here that told me to wrap it around this piece at the top. So that white piece that's sticking out there, I ran it around that. Down this channel, up through the lever. And then there's going to be a little, for most machines, there's a little groove or whatever you want to call it, where you're going to make sure that your thread gets inserted before going into the actual needle. Here, this looks like it's pretty straight across, like it's not a jagged edge to our thread. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this will go in okay. And it did. Okay, so now I'm going to take that underneath my needle and back. Same thing with my bobbin thread. So I've got both there. I do have this pattern piece that we can do a little bit of practice stitching on quickly. Now, yellow isn't going to show on blue just as much as we would like, but the first thing I'm going to do is, let's do that a little slower. I'm going to lower the presser foot. There's a lever here. And then insert the needle by turning the hand wheel. Then press down with your foot pedal to go forward. And of course, because I had already started it there, got distracted, we have to do that once more. Okay, I went a few stitches. Now I'm going to backstitch. On my machine, it's like this. It looks like a little arrow turning around. So you have to hold it down and then stitch. And then it went backwards for me. So we do that at the beginning and ending of our stitching to secure it. And so let's come to a corner. So I'm going to insert my needle as I approach that corner, lift up my presser foot, and turn Again, lower the presser foot. Needle is in the whole time. If the needle was up, then it would slide all around. We don't want that. And then continue forward, okay? So let's take that off. I'm going to lift up the foot. Needle is up. Pull this over and release the threads. So you can see I wasn't really perfectly straight up there. We didn't really talk about, like, you know, your seam allowances at the machine just yet, but we will in a second. But just to kind of show you what your stitches should look like. Okay, so they're not all like jumbled and all of that. Instead, they just look like little straight lines. So let's now take our pattern pieces with the right sides together. Remember the nice sides that you want facing outward together. Now this can be a little bit tricky. We're going to be sewing along a curve. So drop your presser foot down about, I would say, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch away from the very edge of your fabric piece. On this side, the presser foot is going to be our seam guide. So I'm going to follow that edge with my fabric, and you'll see in a moment how that works. But that's a nice little visual guide, whereas there's all these other lines on here that I'm sorry you can't see very well, unfortunately. I'm limited with the technology. Until I get 1,000 subscribers, I can't use my mobile device, which is really unfortunate. So I guess I'll get to 1,000 someday. But anywho, I'm going to insert my needle to get started. Again, push down on that pedal, the foot pedal, and just a few stitches. Then let's press that back stitch button and go back a few stitches. And then forward. So the edge of my fabric here and this curve is following the side of the presser foot. And I'm just gently, gently, gently guiding it backwards. And I think I got a little bit too close to that edge there. Let's check it out. This is a little bit closer than what I wanted. I don't know if you can see that very well, but I think I'm going to go over that once more. I was a little distracted looking at the screen. I just want to make sure that there's like about a 1/4 inch, well, this is about 3/8 of an inch of a seam allowance, so that once this gets like opened up and everything, that it's nice and secure. I just don't want it to be too far away from the edge. So if you need to do the same thing, there's no shame in your game. And again, try it. Follow the side of the fabric with the side of the presser foot. And I think that's much better. So usually you're not going to have 2 lines of stitching there. But in this case, I do. And it'll be fine. So next, the contrasting fabric pieces, we're going to do the same thing. And again, if you're having any questions or running into difficulties, use that live chat feature to the right-hand side of the screen. I'd love to hear from you again. Where are you joining us from? Again, I'm backstitching here. And is this your first time sewing? Who are you making masks for? What designs are you making? I'd love to hear any of that fun stuff. Okay. So I backstitched at the end and the beginning. And next, once you've got your 2 curved pieces stitched, you're going to take your scissors. So you may need to run back to your cutting table and grab them. I know some people work on their dining room tables. Some people work on the floor. I mean, you do what you need to do. But we're going to be clipping into this curved edge without touching these stitches. So to do that, I'm going to be very careful. And I'm just watching where the very points of my scissors go to make sure it doesn't go too far. And why am I doing this, you might wonder? That is because it's going to help the seam open up nice and smoothly, let's just say. So here I'm going to do the same thing on this piece, or these two pieces. Almost got a little bit too close there. You have to really pay attention to what you're doing here. Because if you accidentally trim into your stitches, you're probably going to have to redo that. Now, a lot of people would take this to the ironing board at this point. I just do things by feel a little bit more. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn the seam allowance to one side. And I'm going to go about this way. And I'm going to feel it with my fingers from the top and just make sure that it's laying over in the direction that I want it. Take it back to the machine so that the right side is facing up this time. And we're going to do a top stitch. So I'm going to very carefully place this underneath my presser foot so that it's so small. I wish I could tell you exactly, maybe about 1/8 of an inch away from that center seam is where I'm going to be making my next line of stitching. Again, I've got that kind of flap, that seam allowance pressed to the side. So I'm stitching down where, like in this example here, we've got it. I'm going to stitch on the same side as what I pressed the seam allowance to, okay? So I've got it pressed, in this case, to my right backstitch. And here you have to kind of spread it apart and really make sure you've got it the way you want it. Again, very close to that edge. This part is tricky, I'm not going to lie, because you may want it to be perfectly straight, but when you're on your first couple of these, they're not going to be perfectly straight. They actually do have special presser feet for this purpose. I saw in the original video like a top stitching foot, which would be great. I don't think I have that. I have not ever tried, but we're going to do the best we can. It's somewhat decorative, this stitch. I keep my fingers away from the front of my needle, of course. It's very important. Lift that up, lift it off. Okay. So now you can start to see that. Oh, I wish this fabric was a little bit lighter in color so you could see better here. Okay. But there's my center seam and then the yellow. So we've got this one done. Let's do the other one. And I am actually going to press the seam allowance to the same side. It'll make sense later, but go ahead and do the same. So again, make sure that's pushed to the side, but you kind of have to pull it apart so it's nice and flat underneath your needle there. Okay, great. It's starting to look like a mask, I swear. Okay, so here's this one. I think you can see the yellow stitching and the center seam line right there. Now, we talked about right sides and wrong sides. This time it'll be a little bit more obvious what the right side of your mask is, because it's going to be the side with that top stitching showing and not the side with all these kind of like fringy edges, okay? So the right sides together with your mask. So you've got the ugly sides, all this fraying and all that. It's going to be sticking outwards, and the right sides are inwards. This is a very common thing in sewing, right sides together. And I'm not going to be 100% great at describing why it works the way it works, but you're hiding all the stuff you don't want to see on the inside of your garment or your project. And so Just remember that rule, right sides together, because like 99% of the time, that is accurate. Okay, so now I'm going to line these pieces up here the best I can. One thing you may notice is that on this side, the seam allowance is sticking over this way, and on the other side, it's sticking over this way. So that makes it nice and flat as we sew. I'm going to work with the elastic now. I'll show you how it would work with the ties, but we're going to work with elastic because I think hopefully nobody's said that they don't have it, that a lot of people will have it. With the elastic, I'm taking the cut end, putting it right into the corner. Okay, just like that. And this is going to be sandwiched in. So here is where, if you have your clips or your pins, you can just get that nice and secure in place. So again, we're sandwiching in the elastic. And I mean, I could be going really crazy here and do the other side of this with the ties, but let me just show you what that looks like. With the tie, you would do the same thing, where you put the one end in the corner and secure it, right? And the same thing on the other side. But what you've got to deal with is all of this excess fabric. So I kind of like pile it up like spaghetti or something in the middle, well away from the sides, so it's out of the way. And then do the same thing here. So the principle is the same, whether you're using the elastic or the ties. You want to get the ends into the corners at the sides of your face mask. And we're going to make sure we secure them really well. Okay, so let's go back to the elastic here for this example. And again, I'm going to secure that in. And if you didn't have pins or clips, don't worry. You can do this with your fingers. You just have to go a little slower, obviously, to make sure that it's right where you need it to be, and you're not stitching over something you shouldn't be. I'm going to start stitching on the bottom of the mask. So hopefully you can tell at the top of the mask, it's got more of a curved shape. The bottom is going to be a little more straight, obviously. So we're going to start on the bottom and like towards the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure those edges line up the best you can. And again, here you can pin. And if you pin, let's see, I've got one floating around here. If you pin, just try to pin close to the side there. I just personally feel like if you're pinning these, you don't want a lot of holes in the main compartment of your mask, because it sort of defeats the purpose. Like, we're talking about respiratory droplets that are very small. So that's just my word of warning there. So we'll come back to the machine. Again, drop the presser foot, a little off center on the bottom. Needle is in. Foot pedal, go. Back stitch. Remember to hold that button in. I think on most machine models, it makes you hold it in. Some of the newer ones, that may not be the case. Now I came to my corner here, and this is where the elastic is. So I want to make sure that I am very secure. So I backstitched when I got there, and then I dropped that into almost the very corner and turn. And I'm going to do the same thing, go a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, just to make sure that that elastic is really in place. Then in a moment, we're going to be going over it again once it's turned right side out. But use that side of the presser foot as your guide, as you're stitching. And just make sure, as you take out your pins, your clips, everything's still kind of where it needs to be. Keep your finger well away from the needle. And we'll turn that. So I'm coming towards the center now, and at the center, it's got like this shape like this. So I want to make sure that I'm sort of following that like upside down V shape. So I'm going to take my time here. Come to the center, stop with the needle in, and it's just like turning the corners that we've done before. So I'm going to lift up that presser foot and then drop it down after I pivot the fabric the way that I want it. Here I could tell that my elastic was getting a little bit close to the edge right here, inside there. We want to keep that elastic out of the way. We're just trying to get it at the corners. The other thing with the elastic is we do want to try to lay it flat in there so it's not all twisted for people. Hopefully you've got plenty of fabric, because it will take you a couple masks, I think, until you've really got it down. And there's always ways that you can improve things over time. The more things you do, you'll get ideas, and you'll see feedback online and that kind of thing. So as we come to the home stretch, we want to make sure that we're leaving an opening, like I'd say like at least 2 to 3 fingers wide. So we're coming back towards that center now. Let's get those edges lined up a little bit. And I'm going to stop just shy of the center. Pull my work off of the machine. Look at all these crazy threads here, right? But the thing is, you don't even really need to worry about them because they're going to be on the inside. So go ahead and pull it apart. I really hope you backstitched on either end. Just remember that every time, because we're going to be kind of like pulling on this area. So you'll insert a finger or two and you'll pinch and pull. So we're pulling the insides to the outside. And I know that sounds a little weird or hard to understand, but just keep working the fabric so that you start to feel those elastic straps and you pull on them. Okay. So now it's looking like a little mask. And, some of the threads pull through and you can clean that up. But for the most part, we're not seeing that big jumbled thread mess anymore, which is great. Here's the jumbled thread mess, but I can kind of like tuck that inside. And again, just trim what you need to. So speaking of this opening, we want to get it so that it follows the same line as the rest of the stitching there. So we just have to tuck in maybe, about 1/4 inch from each piece of fabric there to make that nice and flush. And you can start there just so that like you don't have to hold or like pin it or anything. I like to just start right at the opening. It may draw your eye there a little bit if you've got some back stitching, but I'm prepared to take that chance. Back stitch. And what I'm doing here now is I'm not using the edge of the presser foot. I'm doing a little bit more narrow of a seam allowance. So there are some lines here. There's like a 1/8 inch that I'm trying to follow as I stitch. And as I come to the elastic, I want to make sure my needle is like right in there and turn it. Now I noticed, and like I always like to sort of check my work as I go. I noticed that this one piece of elastic, I'm not sure if it was right though, it's right here. Like the edge was kind of like sticking out. So I'm going to go over that again with a zigzag. Not super pretty, but I really want my mask to be functional, to be reused, everything. And it'll be hidden enough because that's by your ear. So here, this part can get a little tricky at the top because we want sort of like a nice seam. We don't want like the back showing on the front. And so you can kind of like flatten that out as you go. Again, about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance there. You follow the edge of the fabric with that line on your machine that hopefully you have. When I come to the center, stop, and again, like it's like a mini pivot as I lift that presser foot and turn my work. And right there in the elastic. And feel free, throw in some back stitching there, or you know, some machines have a tack stitch function to just kind of like secure the stitching a little bit more. So this is where things got a little bit funky on mine. And I have a seam ripper. I mentioned this in another video. They're really handy if you make mistakes. And here I'm just gonna like use my seam ripper to kind of tuck in the ends that are sticking out where they shouldn't be. Now let's see if I can finagle this. I think again, I think I'm gonna go over it once more with a zigzag just to make sure everything is secure and not fraying. And then I'm gonna meet up with the stitches I did on the bottom and a back stitch again, pull off the machine. So here you trim all of your loose ends. Again, we've got that nice yellow contrast stitch, which we probably wouldn't do ordinarily. It's like, hey, look at how great I can sew, or not. I don't know, top stitching makes me nervous personally. It's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna see that I'm a human and do not sew in perfectly straight lines. Jeez. Okay, so this isn't looking half bad. It's not my best mask, but I'm sure it will make someone very happy who does not have a mask. And so here's my little boo-boo. You might have made one yourself in the corner. If you want to get an extra little security, you can switch your machine to a zigzag. This probably didn't happen for you, but it did for me. So just in case it happened for anyone else, I hope I don't pull up my... Okay, sometimes if you move the hand wheel, you might accidentally pull up all the thread there, and it's not fun. So I'm just gonna go over that a little bit forward and backwards, just to make sure that's really in there. And then I'm gonna cut my loose threads. And what I'll do is I'll trim this little tiny piece of elastic that like wasn't cooperating for me. I think another little piece of thread right here. So you can kind of just go around like quality control and get those loose ends. So now we have the mask ready. And if you remember, this was the small child's mask. So here I am in my 30s with this small mask on, and it's covering me. So looks like got a little wobbly right there. You can feel free to like do another line of stitching towards the center, but someone could wear it that way or this way. And as I think I had mentioned at the beginning, the Craft Passion pattern has a lot of options. You can do the filter pocket, you can do a nose wire so that it helps with the fogging up of the glasses. And that's not something I've tried personally. I've been focused on getting so many done that I haven't done that really yet, but I think I'm going to start because I'm a glasses wearer myself and can appreciate the struggle. So any questions so far about the Craft Passion pattern? So we're going to move on to the Deaconess, which is the rectangular mask with tucks. So even if you just joined us, I have a mask you can make. You don't even need the pattern. Hopefully you have a ruler though. I think that was like either not mentioned in the supply list or maybe at the last minute I threw that in there. But if you have a table and you have a halfway decent set of eyes, a straight edge, you know, and scissors, you can make this work. So I don't know, maybe I'm like the only one like that. And I'm just like, oh, I'll wing it. So like, even like a piece of paper, you know, such as this, I could cut this down and make a pattern out of it. There was this massive sized pattern that I made, 8 by 10. I made it for a man with an extra large face. I'm not sure if anybody will ever use it, but I put it in my last pile of donations. But the reason I'm showing you this is called brown craft paper. Again, any paper you've got at home is perfectly fine, but you can get this at the dollar store. And I think that's really great because sewing can be an expensive hobby. So the more cost savings you can find along the way, the better. You know, I find all kinds of things there. I feel like I should be a salesperson or something for the Dollar Tree, but you know, ruler, a protractor, which I have used in sewing projects before. Calculator comes in handy as well. You use a lot of math with sewing. But to make a deaconess pattern, and it's spelled Deaconess, deaconess, which is after the health system out in the Midwest that started making these at the height of the pandemic. There are instructions on their website. They've updated them. I'm going to show you how I make them. And I think you'll find it's pretty easy and straightforward. So I think we'll use this floral fabric. And I don't know why, I just love this particular design. I did have some polka dots around here somewhere. What if we did leopard print on the other side? Might be fun. I also have teal, which could also be good. But I mean, these are very different, which I kind of like because you can wash your mask, obviously, and then have a different mask to wear the next day. So 2 for 1. So anyway, I'm going to, this piece will be plenty big for me because the child size mask, and I'm hoping we have enough time to get through this. The child size mask is 7.5 inches wide by 5 inches tall. Okay, so that piece should work. I had a lot of pre-cut fabric for me when we were making this for healthcare systems and such. So I'm just going to take my purple leopard print here, and I have made a pattern already, like so. Again, I label my pattern. So I put the size, actually, it looks like I did this one 7 by 5 instead of 7.5 by 5. I think that was like trial and error. I figured out that I liked that a little bit better. It was just maybe a smidge too wide. Just, you know, trying on my kids and, you know, whatever. So I'm going to go with this. I did not write deaconess on here, but again, that's a good idea. Write down the particular pattern that you're using. I'm going to use my rotary cutter, and again, my pattern weights are these handy dandy pieces of soap, or bars of soap. I also have these really cool pattern weights that are little mini donuts that my friends and I made. I'm in a sewing group here in Delaware, and it's just using Sculpey clay and washers that you would get at the hardware store. I'm just going to cut around the outside. In this case, the seam allowances are included in the pattern, so I don't need to worry about adding them. Again, you can use just regular old scissors. You'll need to trace around your pattern piece that you create. Again, you can just use the edge of your table as your straight edge. And if you don't have a ruler, just eyeball it, you know. I think over time you start to realize about what an inch is and do your best here. So we've got that piece cut. Now I'm going to cut the daisies. When you're cutting your pattern pieces for the Deaconess mask and for any mask, do pay attention to the directionality of the print. So sometimes I've been guilty of that where like you're not quite paying attention to what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, like, let's just say they were hearts. Your hearts are upside down or sideways on your mask, and that's not really what is going to be most attractive. Okay. So here I've got my two pieces of very contrasting fabric in these rectangles, again, 7 inches wide by 5 inches tall. And I can test that here on my rotary mat. Oh, it's pretty good. 3 to 10. Oops, this is just a smidge too long. But again, I can fix it in the seam allowance at my sewing machine if I so choose. Like, you know, it's such a small, tiny, tiny little variation. I think with this mask, I'm going to use the ties because we talked about using ties, but we didn't do it for real last time with the craft passion. So let's use our ties. I think I've got everything I need. I'm going to the machine. Okay. I always feel like I've forgotten something at one point or another. Here, this is going to be much easier to see. The right side, or the pretty side of the fabric, and the pretty side of the fabric, they're going to go together. But before I do that, I'm going to take my ties. And it looks like here, this is a good example of what you don't want to do. You want to have a nice straight edge, or as close as you can, so that it's easy to get the whole thing in there, in the corner. So here we go. I'm going to like sort of overlap a little bit. It's going to make my seam a little bit bulky, but that's okay. I just want to make sure that these ties really do what they're supposed to and they really stay in place. So again, kind of pile this other end up in the middle like spaghetti. I was going to say, hopefully I didn't lose my other ties. Us creative people, we have trouble keeping our studio spaces organized. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I hear that from a lot of people, though. It's that right-brained thing. I'll just blame it on that. I'm not a slob. I'm really not. So let's see if you can get those corners. You may have to almost like tug on it a little bit to make sure that the both fabric pieces meet in the corners like they're supposed to. Cotton does not really have any stretch to it. So, you know, you've got to be somewhat precise here, but you do your best. Okay, back to the machine. We're going to again start on the bottom edge, which remember in this example, we're wearing our mask this way. So the top and bottom are exactly the same in my example because my print is not in a direction that it's not a heart where the curved edge needs to be towards the top, but just pay attention to that. Anyway, bottom edge, a little bit off center. I'm going to start there. I'm going to push the bulk of those ties towards the center of my work. Lower my needle. Oops, got to switch it back to straight stitch. Because remember, I had that little goof and I did the zigzag there. So here we go. Start stitching, back stitch, and we're going to make our way to that corner where we've got our tie secured. So here I go. I'm going to turn it and I'm going to back stitch over it. Make sure it's really doing what it needs to do. And look, got a runaway tie there. This can be tricky, I'm not gonna lie, when you've got all this bulk in here from these ties, and you wanna make sure you don't accidentally stitch it into your side seams. So just pay attention to what you're doing if you're using the ties. Again, if you're using elastic, you put the corner in the corner of your fabric pieces, just the same as we did with the ties. You don't have to worry about all that bulk though. It's kind of like a rainbow shape on the sides there. But again, just backstitch over those corners. I'm using the side of my presser foot as my guide here as I sew. And then again, backstitch, turn my work, backstitch again, because why not? And I feel like that was starting to creep up there. Okay. Make sure keep the insides where they belong. Backstitch, turn, backstitch, turn. Okay, here again, we leave that opening 2 to 3 fingers wide at the bottom so we don't meet up where we started stitching. Got to have that opening to turn our work right side out. Now, if you ever make a pillow, this is one of the things they teach you. You want to trim your corners, and it reduces bulk and helps make your corners a little prettier when you have your work right side out. But of course, be careful when you do this because you don't want to accidentally clip into your stitching. Again, I've got these tails here, but they're probably going to get eaten up as I turn my work. And if not, I'll trim them later. But a lot of stuff gets hidden on the inside. Okay. So I just keep pulling and pulling. The more I look at this, the more I'm like, this mask does not look right. The purple and the black and the yellow. It's like, what am I thinking? But again, you're not going to see the other side when you're wearing it. Hopefully, if you stitch it just so, you'll only see one side of it. So like if I didn't have this quite right, then you'd see the purple peeking over the side, but we're going to really try to make that a nice crisp edge as we sew. Again, I want to tuck in the sides right here of the opening that we've created, that we just used, and get that nice and flush. And I'm going to start stitching right there. Again, about was it an eighth? I always forget, an eighth of an inch seam allowance here. I'm going to lower my needle up, but you know what? When I just did this, I realized that that edge was showing underneath. So again, extra careful to try to get that lined up just so before you start stitching. So let's hide that purple. Pretend like it's not even there. The person seeing this little girl or little boy or child wearing the mask, they're only going to see the one side, not both sides at the same time. So again, I backstitch. I keep it close to the edge. I think, you know, there's going to be a little bit of that purple showing, but it'll be okay. So we're turning as we come to the corner, and here feel free to throw a little backstitch into the mix. The thing is, when you get to the corner and you start coming down that side, you don't want to go too far because we're going to be putting in some tucks or pleats. So I'm going to insert my needle back into the fabric here, lift my presser foot, and I'm going to pinch about 1/2 inch, making sure I grab both pieces of fabric and just pinch so that it's like a little bump. You know, this is hard to see, but Then I'm going to turn that down. So again, your seam ripper can come in handy here. Just sort of get that tuck right where you want it. What the tuck is going to do is make the side of the mask contour to the face. Okay, as soon as I'm clear of that tuck, I'm going to do the same thing. Pinch up a ½ inch, tuck it down, lower my presser foot, and go. And if you can get 3 of these tucks, great. But in children's masks, they're so small that a lot of times you don't have the space to work with here. Let's see what I can do. I don't think this is going to be a real tuck there. It's like a baby tuck. Again, I'm gonna sort of flatten out as I go over this bottom edge, staying close to the edge of the fabric. And now we're turning back to the other edge. Here's where things get a little bit interesting. Actually, that bottom tuck didn't even come into play, so I'll just ignore that. Let's just go with 2 tucks. But here's my ½ inch pinch, and I'm going to turn it upwards this time so that it's going the same direction as on the other side. Now that the work is flipped, hopefully you'll see what I mean when you get to that part. Tuck it up again. Get right to that corner, and sometimes you really have to tug on your fabric because these machines can struggle with the thickness of the fabric when you've got it tucked over like that. So I'm going to come back to where I began. Overlap the stitches a little bit and backstitch to finish. So now I'm going to trim all of my stray threads. And again, I was using yellow here to make it a little bit more noticeable. Typically, you don't want a contrasting thread unless you're like the most perfect seamstress or sewist out there. Because, you know, we're all human. We all make little goofs. Like right here, this is like a little bit jumbled thread action happening. But I can find the ends and sort of trim that up if I want to. I can go over it again. If it really bugs me, I'll take my seam ripper. So you want to see it in action, you'll just go under. And it's great when you have the contrasting thread so you can really see. Oops, you can see that and just pull up to rip. We don't want to rip our fabric. So that's always the tricky thing when you're using a seam ripper and you're using thread that's really closely matched to what you're working on. That is so hard because sometimes you're accidentally, oops, and I almost did it there, accidentally poking little holes into the fabric, and you really don't want to do that. Okay, so let's go over that little part again, because accidents do happen. Backstitch, come to the corner. Again, you know, I want my corners to be nice and secure. One thing that people will tell you is make sure you have a lint brush for your machine and that you clean it every so often, because even right now sitting at my machine, my nose is starting to run because of these little fibers that get kicked up as you're sewing with cotton in particular, or you know, maybe some linen, some fleece especially. The subfabrics really have a lot of lint that gets kicked up into the air and unfortunately stuck into your machine. So here I've got a lot of crazy threads. Let's trim these up. I am open to questions. Are you stuck right now? Anything like that, feel free to comment in the live chat. Would you be interested in another video to talk about gaiters? I think it's spelled Gaiters. And I don't know if you guys have seen these, but what they are is like a tube of fabric. And unfortunately, I haven't made one yet to show you. But you've probably been seeing people wearing these now where it comes up over the nose. It may or may not kind of hang down a little bit, but it's a tube that goes all the way around your head so that when you're not wearing the gaiter, you can pull it down and just have it be around your neck. And then when you need to pull it up, like for example, if you were on a walking path or something, and you weren't around a lot of people, you wanted to pull it down. I mean, I think that's a little dangerous sometimes, but you know, if you're interested in that, I am open to doing a video about that as well. So today, I know not all of you were here from the very beginning, but you can probably catch the replay of this. Somewhat new to doing these live streams, so you know, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I think you'll be able to go to my channel, Create Already, and find this recording, and then you can skip ahead, do what you need to do, the parts you get stuck on. So we went over the Craft Passion pattern first, then the Deaconess, which I'm going to type in the chat actually because I didn't have that in the description. So just in case you want to look up the instructions, they're super simple to follow, not detailed. You know, one of the things about sewing is you have to a lot of times figure things out as you go, and you know, you may not have a picture to go by. You know, for example, you've got a pattern that looks like this, okay? And then you've got a pattern that looks like, well, wherever the other pattern was that had, here it is, that has pictures along the way. I mean, this is very detailed. So if you do want to get into more detail and actually follow more specifically the instructions for the Craft Passion pattern, do check it out. Maybe you figure out which one you want to make and you don't print as many pages. Maybe you're smart and you print double-sided like me, or you just keep it open on a computer screen instead of printing. I'm trying to be eco-friendly. I really am. This was a lot of paper. But again, there's options out there for the filter mask. There's options, you know, to have a sleeve that you put the filter in, like I mean, it can be any number of things, a tissue. People are using antibacterial wipes that are dried out. I don't know all of the research and everything, so that's something to look into if it's an option that you are interested in. But again, there's a nose wire option to help with the glasses fogging up. So we can certainly do that in a separate video, or just feel free to check out Craft Passion has a video that I believe runs around 20 minutes long that you can follow along with. There's no audio, it's all subtitles. But I think it does a very nice job of walking you through that process. So any questions you can think of? Again, in the live chat to the right, you should be able to see that. And I'm just going to see if I can see any other comments before we wrap for the evening. I hope that you had a great time, especially if this is your first time sewing. Stick with it. I will say to you, the hardest thing for me for, like, I'm talking years, was properly threading my machine so that it wasn't a jumbled mess all the time, because literally it was like every time I tried, it would mess up. And I was just so frustrated and I didn't know what to do. So, oh, this is really weird. I'm on two different screens and it's blowing my mind a little bit. But I think that's about it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I have different ideas for future videos. I'm always open to hear your suggestions. I'll type my email address into the chat. If you know a young person in the Northern Delaware or tri-state area who would like to learn to sew but needs help with, the financial means, like they don't have access to a machine or materials, let me know, because I really want to get a nonprofit started, but I'm not quite there yet. I do have some donations of machines and supplies that I would be happy to gift someone with. I really hope you'll consider donating a couple of masks, as many as you can, to your local school for them to distribute to children who don't have them, or, a community center, just try to link up because there is a need, believe it or not. I mean, I was at the post office a few weeks ago and I saw an older woman who was desperately trying to make a face mask out of a plastic grocery bag. And I mean, she was working at it for it had to have been 5 minutes. So we take for granted sometimes that by this point, everybody has a mask, but that's not the case. I can tell you that. And I'm sure if, you've been out to the stores, you've been seeing people finagling things or, pulling their shirts over their mouth and nose and that kind of thing. So anyway, thanks for joining me. And until next time, rock on.